Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited to be covering the Phoenix Suns here with the continuation of our trade guide series leading up to the February 6th NBA trade deadline. Reminder, I will be live on the channel the entire week of the NBA trade deadline, so this is the place you'll want to be. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for future uploads and live streams. Hit that notification bell as well. And let's not waste any more time and jump into it here with today's video preview. What exactly are we going to be talking about when it comes to the Phoenix Suns and their trade situation? Well, first of all, we're going to start with the tradable draft picks. Not only which assets do the Suns actually have, but which ones can they actually trade? The Stepien rule plays a big factor here as well, given the fact that they owe so many swap options. The Suns have a quite limited collection of draft picks, so not only will we discuss their first round draft picks in today's video, we'll also cover all of their second round draft picks that they can trade, because it is an important topic for Phoenix because it's some of their best assets that they have to work with via trade after trading down in the 2024 NBA draft and ultimately still picking up Ryan Dunn, which was a great pick, by the way. We'll look then at the second apron status and the rules and restrictions which apply to the Phoenix Suns, which will further hamper and limit their trade flexibility as a result of being a second apron team. We'll then go and look at the trade likely players. Which players on the Phoenix Suns roster are very likely to get moved? Which ones would the Suns like to move? And who will be on the chopping block for Phoenix? Now, there's a lot of nuance in this here, a lot of caveats that will come into play as well, both with the second apron and a no trade clause. You guys know what I'm talking about. So stay tuned for that section of the video. Then we'll get into some trade targets, who the Phoenix Suns could really look to go after, and a few trade packages in today's video too. There was a few I wanted to talk about. One that's been heavily reported on, of course, the Jimmy Butler drama. We'll talk about him in today's video. We'll also get into projected activity level and the Phoenix Suns future, and I think these two things are very tightly tied together. How active the Suns are will give us a really good indication of both the near and distant future of the Phoenix Suns, because they're at a point right now where the distant future doesn't look pretty and the current iteration of the team doesn't either. I think they have to make at least some type of decision one way or another. Do they continue to go further into this team, or do they maybe take a step back and try and add assets? Something that I'm not expecting them to do, but if they don't, their future could be in real jeopardy long term. Let's now talk about their tradable draft picks. They have a 2031 first round pick to trade. Pretty much every single team in the NBA, minus a couple, have that pick to trade. Given how the NBA trade rules work, you have 7 years of tradable first round picks. So almost every single team in the NBA has this 2031 first round pick at their disposal right now. So it doesn't make the Phoenix Suns special. It's not a premier asset, even though I myself think it's extremely valuable. Teams around the league might not. You might be saying, well, if you think it's extremely valuable, why would other teams around the league not believe that? And you have to think about GM lifespan, and specifically in that role, you look around the league, how many GMs, how many executives are guaranteed or likely to be still serving their team in that role 6-7 years from now? And the reality is, it's not extremely or overly likely. So as a result of that, some GMs and teams, this will be a non-starter for them in negotiations. They will not have interest in this 2031 Phoenix Suns first round pick, even though I myself believe it is a very valuable asset to own going forward. Some teams just might not operate that way or feel that way. You also look at the second round picks that Phoenix has, and they did a very good job. I already referenced it in the 2024 NBA draft. They traded down with Denver. Denver moved up to get Deron Holmes II. Unfortunately, he ended up rupturing his Achilles, hoping for the best for him when he recovers. But Phoenix did a great job drafting both in the first and second round. They took Ryan Dunn, who was, I think, one of the biggest sleepers in the entire draft. Obviously, the offensive game had so much work to come along. We've seen some strides from him. We've also seen some of the setbacks along the way, but he was an amazing defensive prospect. And I think for Phoenix specifically, they were the type of team that really needed that kind of athlete and that kind of player in their roster. So they did a great job trading down, accumulating more assets, and then also drafting Oso Ighodaro in round 2 was a very, very good pick in my opinion. Getting a big man with some feel. Now, he doesn't exert a ton of rim pressure, but he was, I think, a pretty big upgrade into their backup spot for the center position. And they can also extend additional swap options on their 2026, 2028, and 2030 first round picks. This is something that Phoenix has already done a bit. They owe swap options not just one, but multiple teams in these years. They did it last year in the David Roddy acquisition as well. So now, as a byproduct, Memphis has a swap option with them. And listen, this is where things get really scary and really dangerous for Phoenix about their distant future. The more swap options you extend, the more likely it is you're picking at 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, or 30 in the NBA draft. And the reason for that, let's say that you had a swap option this year with the Washington Wizards. Well, the Wizards this year wouldn't use that swap option, right? The Wizards are going to be toward the top of the draft themselves. But let's say you had a second team with a swap option, and that team happened to be, let's say, the Cleveland Cavaliers. Obviously, this is a made-up hypothetical, but the Cavaliers have the best record in the NBA right now. As a result of that, the Cavs would love to exercise that swap option, which would put the Suns at the very back end of the first round. So that's where all of the risks come with these additional swap options, which is something I think that they should not do, but it is very important for me to share the fact that they can. And we've seen some teams around the league, like the San Antonio Spurs, for example, be really aggressive targeting swap options from teams, as the Spurs expect to ultimately become a very good team for a long time with Victor Wembanyama. They have been preying on teams waiting for them to offer swap options. They have swap options with Minnesota, with Dallas, with Boston. They have a bunch of swap options that they're sitting on over the next 5 to 7 years. So maybe Phoenix and San Antonio could work something out. We'll talk about that a little bit later in this video. But what I want to look at now here are some of those second apron trade rules and restrictions. So first of all, the Suns are $31 million over that second apron threshold. So if you were thinking, well, maybe there's a way for them to duck below it, not really. You'd have to try and find a way to salary dump $31 million. It's not feasible. It's not possible right now with where teams are at cap-wise around the NBA. They also, as a result of this, cannot aggregate salaries. And by aggregate, I mean you cannot trade two players out the door in the same deal. So even though Jusuf Nurkic makes $18.1 million and Grayson Allen makes a little bit over $15 million, you cannot, by rule now as a second apron team, combine those two salaries together to trade for a $33 million player. As a result of that, someone like Brandon Ingram, who makes $36 million, is almost unattainable, honestly, for the Phoenix Suns, unless the Pelicans were willing to attach other salaries and work toward a Bradley Beal number, which I just don't really see as possible. It's not something that I think is very feasible at this point in time, which makes trading for any player making more than $18.1 million really impossible to trade for. Some great examples of that right now are Jakob Poeltl of the Toronto Raptors, Nikola Vucevic of the Chicago Bulls are a few examples that come to mind immediately for me. And there's a plethora of other ones as well. And I think, Colin Sexton, another one in Utah. There are rebuilding teams that have players making between $19 and $25 million that they'd be willing to trade. But Phoenix, as a second apron team, cannot even come close to trading for any of those guys by restriction and by rule. They also cannot take in more than 100% of their outgoing salaries. So the fact that they cannot aggregate those salaries and they cannot take in more than 100%, if they're trading Jusuf Nurkic, the most that they can take back in return is, again, a dollar for dollar exchange, $18.1 million. They cannot go above Jusuf Nurkic's contract in a trade if they were to trade Nurkic. The same stands for Beal. If they do find a Bradley Beal trade and he waives his no trade clause, this rule obviously still applies. They also cannot use trade exceptions from the prior year, and they cannot include cash in trade, something that over the past 15, 20 years, that's been a very prevalent thing in the NBA, where owners throw cash into deals to incentivize the other team and the other owner to accept a trade. And that's something now Phoenix cannot do either. So not only are they restricted from, trying to buy, almost bribe teams, they really have only their draft picks to work with when it comes to actual value to trade. They also, this is a very important note, this isn't a trade rule, but it's a roster rule that does affect them, and I think is very important to keep in mind. They cannot sign a buyout or a waived player this season if his salary prior to buyout or prior to being waived exceeded $12.2 million, which was the non-taxpayer mid-level exception number for this season. So let's say, hypothetically, Ben Simmons gets bought out by the Brooklyn Nets. Well, guess what? The Phoenix Suns cannot, by rule, sign him. Now, would they want to? Who knows? But again, this is a hypothetical situation. This is a player who might get bought out who makes more than $12.2 million. So you need to keep those things in mind when it comes to Phoenix's trade restrictions. Here are their desired trade chips, the players that they would like to move if they possibly could. Bradley Beal is the headliner, the most important one to talk about. 3 years, $160 million left on his deal. It was inexplicable when the Washington Wizards gave him this contract and included a no-trade clause in it. And it was even more inexplicable when the Phoenix Suns traded multiple swap options, multiple assets out the door for Bradley Beal and allowed him to keep that no-trade clause. They could have worked out a resolution where Beal waived his no-trade clause completely. They did not do that. Bradley Beal now controls his future. So if you see any mock trade regarding Bradley Beal, you need to remember this. It comes down to if Bradley Beal actually wants the trade to happen or not. You can't just send Bradley Beal to Utah. You can't just send Bradley Beal to XYZ, whatever city. Bradley Beal is going to have, if even a list at all, a very short one and a very particular collection of teams that he would even be willing to consider suiting up for. So that is the first concern for the Phoenix Suns coming up to this trade deadline. Yusuf Nurkic is another concern. Out of the rotation, of course, Bradley Beal's been playing in a six-man role lately. Yusuf Nurkic, DNP CDs, did not play coach's decision. And the result of that obviously is kind of one, first of all, keeping him healthy for a trade to possibly materialize, and then also secondly, signaling to every single team in the league, please, we're desperate, make a deal with us. We don't want Yusuf Nurkic, we need a center. We want anyone else's center besides our own. And this was predictable a few years ago when they went out and got the Portland Trailblazers bigs, both Eubanks and Nurkic. I said, that doesn't make any sense. They were not good for the Blazers. Why would the Suns want them? It's been a terrible outcome. Now, I'm not saying DeAndre Ayton was going to be the center long-term for Phoenix, but Yusuf Nurkic clearly isn't either. And at $19 million this year, or $18.1 million this year, he's a tradable contract. And one that, listen, some teams will be okay with taking in this money, but there's also reports that some teams, like the Charlotte Hornets, for example, have no interest in harboring Yusuf Nurkic's contract. So this isn't just an easy, he's an expiring deal. There's 2 years left on it, which makes it complicated. Grayson Allen, this is where trading Grayson Allen to get other assets might make some sense for Phoenix to open up their draft pick collection, but at the same time, that comes with a cost. Even though Grayson Allen's not a perfect player, and I'm sure some Suns fans don't like Grayson Allen at all, he's also been a very good shooter for them since acquiring him. Of course, Grayson Allen has a connection with Mike Budenholzer as well. So I'm not assuming Grayson Allen gets traded, but he is someone who could be on the chopping block if certain moves have to be made to get something bigger done in return. He's on a, I think, okay contract. 4 years, $70 million with a player option in the final year. Maybe a little rich for Grayson Allen's talent level, but all in all, not the worst contract in the NBA by any stretch of the imagination. The two above it are much worse in my opinion. And then Josh Okogie. This is where I have to give Matt Ishbia and the Phoenix Suns some flowers. You guys know, if you've been watching the channel, and especially Suns fans, you know I've been very, very harsh on the Phoenix Suns. And I'm not going to step back from that. I've been very much right about it. They got swept in the first round last year by Minnesota, the first ever sweep in playoff history for the Minnesota Timberwolves. And then also, they've not been good this season. So just through 2 years, we have enough sample size to say that I was correct about everything post-Bradley Beal trade. But the one thing that I do have to say the Suns are doing really, really well with, they've been creative in a lot of ways. And one of the ways that they were super creative was giving Josh Okogie this contract. 2 years, $16 million with a non-guaranteed second season. This was a very calculated decision, and this opens up a host of trade possibilities. Josh Okogie's not an $8 million per year player. He's an end-of-bench, kind of fringe rotation guy, honestly, throughout the course of regular season. And when it comes to the playoffs, we all know he's not a playoff rotation guy. So why would the Suns pay him $8 million? The whole point of it is to increase their trade flexibility. Had they signed him to a minimum contract, they would only have a $2 million-ish contract to trade away, and given the second apron rules, they would not be able to take in a bigger contract in return. Josh Okogie, though, making $8 million becomes a much more tradable contract, and one that is a lot friendlier to work with around the league without it being a long-term contract that teams are afraid of eating and taking, which makes, yes, Phoenix in some ways very, very smart and creative. I think going forward, we're going to see them do this more often and more frequently. And listen, the one thing about Matt Ishbia, even though I think he's made some terrible decisions as an owner for the Phoenix Suns, he's also put his wallet where his mouth is, and he's paid. And he's spent a lot of money on this roster, a ton of money in player salaries, and not cheaping out on a guy like Josh Okogie in order to help the trade flexibility of the Phoenix Suns is a sign that, if things ever turn around for Phoenix, Matt Ishbia can still be a positive asset for them as an owner. We'll see if that ever comes to fruition, but it's something I wanted to say in this video. When it comes to trade targets, there's a couple of upper echelon guys who are making more than that $18.1 million mark that I talked about with Jusuf Nurkic, which would mean Bradley Beal has to be going out in that trade, or the role player collection, guys who make a little bit less than $18.1 million, and in some cases significantly less than that $18.1 million mark. Let's start with the guy everyone wants to talk about, Jimmy Butler of the Miami Heat. This is the type of player that could save the season for the Phoenix Suns. I know, listen, the drama everywhere he's been, there's been significant drama that's followed him in Chicago, in Minnesota, even in his short tenure in Philadelphia, there was some drama. And now the end of his tenure in Miami, which was extremely successful overall, it's ending horrendously. So Jimmy Butler, even though he has some history of leading franchises and tearing down franchises, he could be, in some ways, the saving grace for the Phoenix Suns this season if they are able to get a trade done. Now, for Brandon Ingram, who we talked about earlier in this video, it's just not very feasible to actually see a trade get done. He makes $36 million, which means for New Orleans, if they're going to trade him in a deal to Phoenix, there would have to be other salaries involved, other moving pieces. The closest salary that they really have to get toward Bradley Beal's number would be Herb Jones. And there's no way that the Phoenix Suns are going to have enough assets to land both Herb Jones and Brandon Ingram, so you would need a third, maybe even a fourth team involved in some ways to work the salaries out through that. Extremely convoluted, extremely complex, and something that I just honestly did not want to include in this video. I do want to talk about Brandon Ingram because I do think he's a player who's readily available for other teams, and maybe this is the type of guy Phoenix would consider because he has more size and length than Bradley Beal, but I really don't think he solves a lot of the Suns' problems as they currently exist anyway, so I don't really think he's the target to go after. Jimmy Butler would be a much more fruitful target, even though he's older and is more expensive. I do think he's the player that would make more sense from that upper echelon category. And then when it comes to the role players, Harrison Barnes from the Spurs makes exactly $18 million this season. That's the type of player where if they could try and make a deal for, he would be a significant upgrade. Last year we saw them trade for Royce O'Neal. The Suns have badly needed extra size, athleticism, and forward play, and Harrison Barnes could maybe be the best possible target for them. This year, guys like Kyle Kuzma, again, just overpriced. Malcolm Brogdon, a very talented guard who has experience with Mike Budenholzer in the past. Does not work from a salary perspective because of the second apron rules. So you have to get creative here. Harrison Barnes is a guy that can maybe fit into that. Nick Richards, a very cheap option, making just $5 million. We'll talk about that with the Josh Okogie contract, given the fact that the Hornets have reportedly no interest in taking in Jusuf Nurkic's contract. Then you see other targets, two from the Portland Trailblazers, Robert Williams III, who makes a little bit over $12 million, and then Matisse Thybulle, who is above $10 million as well. These are guys where you would need extra salaries, again, attached to them if there's a deal centered around Jusuf Nurkic. But this is where maybe if something creative happens, let's say the Suns go out and trade for Nick Richards using Josh Okogie's contract, and then they can find a way to maybe acquire Robert Williams. Maybe they would attach Grayson Allen's contract. So they trade, one player here, one player there, and overall the collection of moves maybe paints a better picture for their overall team. Robert Williams, of course, a big man who can protect the rim. It would really kind of change the dynamic of their front court with two athletic rim protecting bigs in Nick Richards and Robert Williams. Now, I don't love Nick Richards that much. We'll talk about that later. Matisse Thybulle, obviously, lengthy wing. It would just be a defensive improvement for the roster with some offensive jeopardization in a lot of ways. The Raptors have two intriguing front court players in Kelly Olynyk, Chris Boucher. Boucher. Olynyk over $12 million. Boucher, I think, flirting with $10 million on his contract, maybe a little bit more than that. Those two guys are players who can make some sense. Davion Mitchell, another guy. I think Chris Boucher makes $10.8 million. Davion Mitchell makes $6.4 million. You put those two numbers together, you're looking at $17.2 million. Could the Suns look at acquiring those two players in a deal in return for Jusuf Nurkic if they include a collection of draft assets? Maybe. That would be something worth considering as well, that I don't think is too crazy. And then Jonas Valanciunas makes $9.9 million. Not a terrible option if you dump Jusuf Nurkic somewhere and you're looking for a center who can play 20 minutes a night for you. Listen, Jonas Valanciunas isn't great. He's not, I think, in my opinion, a quality starter in the NBA anymore. He's probably like the 28th best center. So this is where Phoenix's options are. They don't have meaningful upgrades on their roster readily available to them. If they don't get something done for Jimmy Butler, it's just hard for them to really upgrade their roster in a significant fashion. Let's focus on Nick Richards, though, here. I wanted to talk about what a potential trade could look like, assuming no Jusuf Nurkic involvement going to Charlotte. It would essentially be Josh Okogie and 2 second-round picks going out the door to Charlotte. And in return, Phoenix would get Nick Richards and some other salary. It could be a different player, given the fact that I don't think the Hornets would want to include a young player in this package. Taj Gibson was the guy I threw in. I know, yes, the Hornets signed him for a mentorship role. He's 39. He's got no role in the Hornets' long-term future. If this is what it takes to get a deal done, you throw Taj Gibson in the deal and say, listen, we're going to send you to a playoff team, or a team that at least has playoff aspirations. Hopefully you can have one more shot in the postseason, even though you wouldn't be in the rotation and wouldn't play at all because you're not very good at this point of your career. I don't think Taj Gibson would mind going from Charlotte to Phoenix anyway, as long as he's staying in a warm state, right? But Nick Richards, listen, everyone around the league right now, it seems like everyone's got this group thought that, oh, Nick Richards is going to be an awesome upgrade for whatever team gets him. People are conflating contract value for actual player caliber. Nick Richards is cheap, $5 million. There's partially a reason why he's cheap, and there's a reason the Hornets have single-digit wins this far into the season with Nick Richards playing high minutes and a high role. He's not that good, okay? He has an elite play initiator in LaMelo Ball, one of the better passers in the NBA, one of the better high pick and roll guards who throws lobs well, and they play at a fast, frantic, frenetic pace. Those things should, in theory, all help Nick Richards be a productive offensive player. And then defensively, even though I think the Hornets have a lot of problems, it doesn't just stem on Nick Richards alone. Nick Richards, his help defensive feel is not great. I think if I was going to compare him to a player around the league right now, it's Jackson Hayes. And that's a player the Lakers are looking to upgrade over in their center rotation. So if Suns fans believe getting Nick Richards is going to solve all of their problems, it's going to be a very, very dramatic ending there where Suns fans are going to say, why is Nick Richards not very good? And it shouldn't be some mystery. He's not been productive. He's not been a super impactful winning player for the Hornets his entire career, but that's been overlooked. He's cheap. He's a player that the Suns could readily get using Josh Okogie's creative contract. Another option here is Harrison Barnes. This would take 3 second-round picks and Jusuf Nurkic's contract, and the Suns would get Harrison Barnes. I think for the Spurs, even though they're flirting with a play-in, playoff spot in some ways, if you offer multiple picks to San Antonio for an older player like Harrison Barnes, I think that there is a real conversation that can be had here. The Suns also do open up a little bit of money flexibility, saving $125,000. It's not much, but against the tax and the apron, it is meaningful. And Harrison Barnes is a significant upgrade over Jusuf Nurkic at this point of both of their careers. For San Antonio, you might be saying, well, why would they do this? They already have Zach Collins. It's all about draft picks. This is another area where maybe it's not second-round picks, but maybe it's an additional swap option. We talked about that earlier in this video. That's something that I think could make some sense if San Antonio might not just want second-round picks. And if that's the case, that's A-okay. I look at it as saying this is added trade flexibility for San Antonio. Let's say in the future they want to go after some veteran player that they think could be like the 8th guy in their rotation. Having these 3 second-round picks, they could reroute later to get that type of guy when they're more of a playoff caliber team. Yes, you do sacrifice Harrison Barnes in the short term, but I think in the long term it opens up extra avenues for you to continue improving your team. So this is something San Antonio, I think, could consider. Not necessarily saying this gets the deal done or not. Maybe there has to be one of those swap options involved. Well, not exactly sure. This is just a loose trade framework, but one that I think does upgrade Phoenix's starting lineup if Harrison Barnes would be included in that, or maybe he just comes off the bench as an additional forward to offer maybe a little bit more size in their front court if they do go the Nick Richards route, for example. And then you also move on to a big deal. And this is the deal that we need to spend some time on because it's extremely important. Jimmy Butler to the Phoenix Suns. Bradley Beal to the Chicago Bulls with Alec Burks and the 2031 first-round pick from the Suns. Now you might be saying, wait, Sheldon, I thought you told us that any deal for Bradley Beal needs to factor in his no-trade clause. That's why the Chicago Bulls are one of the only teams in the NBA that I could even imagine Beal waiving his no-trade clause for. The reason for that is Billy Donovan, his college coach, a coach that he looked up to, has talked multiple times about helping him become a man, going from a boy to a man, obviously helping him dramatically become an NBA draft prospect in his development. Billy Donovan is a special person to Bradley Beal, and that connection there maybe is what it would take for Bradley Beal to waive his no-trade clause. Again, this is speculation. I'm not saying I have firm reporting on this or that I know this, but if you're going to paint potential Bradley Beal frameworks, there has to be some line of thought that makes sense for why Beal would consider it. Miami would make sense. The Heat don't want Bradley Beal. That's just point blank the reality. The Heat might not even want Zach LaVine, who they're getting in this contract, but the way I look at it, the Bulls are already interested in getting off of Zach LaVine, and there's not really a huge market for Zach LaVine. If there was, he would have been traded by now. This is a way to get off of Zach LaVine and pick up a first-round draft pick in the process for the Chicago Bulls. That's exactly what they do here. They also get Alec Burks, who could get routed to a fourth team potentially in some kind of deal. And the Heat. Why did the Miami Heat make this trade? Well, one, Jimmy Butler is possibly going to opt into his player option next year and continue to cause drama and stir the pot for Miami, something that Jimmy Butler is very clearly comfortable doing. So trading him flat out just makes some sense if you want to look at improving your roster in the short and long term. Getting off of Jimmy Butler might get rid of a real dramatic headache that the Heat don't want to deal with internally, as the reason why they suspended him for 7 games earlier this month. And then you also look at the way Zach LaVine's been playing. He's been playing all-star level basketball. Literally, he's been awesome this season in a lot of ways for the Chicago Bulls. Now, is he going to be an all-star? Probably not, but he's been extremely effective, productive. He's shooting the ball at a very, very high clip. There's been multiple stretches this season where it just feels like he cannot miss. And I think for Miami, with Jimmy Butler out in his absence, we felt kind of a real lack of scoring for this team around Tyler Hero. Bam Adebayo has not been having a good offensive season at all. And Zach LaVine, honestly, you can make an argument he'd be their best player immediately. Now, Tyler Hero's had an awesome year. I think it's maybe a coin flip between those two guys. Obviously, Hero's long-term ceiling probably a little bit higher than where LaVine presently is at. But the reality here, you go from Jimmy Butler to Zach LaVine. You're not losing as much talent as you would maybe assume. You are losing some talent, but it's not as dramatic as some people would talk about. You're also getting a bit younger. You get Javon Carter, who I think would fit really well into the Heat culture. He's part of the reason why the Bulls are doing this as well is you're dumping Javon Carter's contract, so your cap flexibility this first season isn't even hindered anyway. And then when it comes to second-round picks, the Heat also get 3 second-rounders. The 3 we've talked about already in this video from the Suns. So it's a collection of picks in here. But Jimmy Butler sits at a spot where he could help the Phoenix Suns tremendously. He's the type of player that Phoenix is really badly missing. And if the Suns could walk away with Bradley Beal, this is a real significant upgrade to their roster and to their future. Listen, the future of the Phoenix Suns will not be pretty. The team isn't very good right now, and their core is old, and they're very thin, shallow. They don't have a lot of talent on their roster outside of the very top of the roster. Kevin Durant's well into his mid-30s. Devin Booker is 28 years old. He's not getting any younger, and who knows how long he's going to even want to be in Phoenix. So, given where Phoenix is at and how all in they are, it's either sit and do nothing, which doesn't make any sense, trade the 2 stars on your left right now, which doesn't really make any sense either given how all in they are, or trade for Jimmy Butler and aggressively push to get it done and make it happen. You're going to have to place as many calls as it takes, but Jimmy Butler's the type of guy that could change this Phoenix Suns team and this Phoenix Suns season. And listen, I'm not a huge Jimmy Butler fan. I think he's a heck of a talent, and I think his kind of aggression and two-way play, his mid-range scoring diet, and the ability to draw fouls, get to the free throw line, exert a little bit more rim pressure than Bradley Beal does. This is the type of player that I think could, in theory, change Phoenix quite a bit. So when it comes to projected activity level, I think the Phoenix Suns are going to be like the crazy ex-girlfriend. That's how active they're going to be, blowing up other people's phones, blowing up other GM's phones, saying, please, please, please get back to work with us. Please call us. Please, 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 please make a trade. They're going to be borderline begging because that's where they're at right now. James Jones is probably worried about his job. Matt Ishbia is probably worried that he's looking like an idiot with the team not being very good after last offseason saying 28 teams would trade their future for ours. No, they wouldn't. Okay? I don't even know if there's one team in the league that would trade their future for yours. That's how bad the Phoenix Suns are currently positioned. Now, yes, they have top-end talent. If they go about this trade deadline perfectly, they could maybe, and this is a huge maybe thread the needle to becoming a good team. Maybe not even an elite team, maybe a good team. A team that can finish 5 to 10 games above 500 and maybe be a threat in the playoffs. That's where they're at right now. They're in jeopardy of not even making the postseason. We'll see what happens. The Suns have not been great. They have been below 500 for a long stretch of this season. They need to be crazy ex-girlfriend active, and if they're not, the season's not going to get any better for the Phoenix Suns. If you have to bring Yusuf Nurkic back after, DNP CDs, that's not going to be pretty. I'm not sure how long Bradley Beal is going to be happy with coming off the bench. He's been a consummate pro so far, so I don't want to, throw any, disrespect on his name in that regard. He's been an awesome pro for them in the decision to go off, in their decision to play him off the bench. But who knows? Maybe by March or April, he might be sick of it. So you have to factor in some of those personal things as well when it comes to your players. And if they're not moved at the trade deadline, things might get ugly there in Phoenix in the short term. If you guys want to know how I would rebuild the Phoenix Suns, I have a series up on the channel, a 2K25 series where I take over for Matt Ishbia, James Jones, and the Phoenix Suns front office. I run the team in the way that I think they should be ran, with a lot of big trades in episode 1, a lot of fun throughout the course of the series so far. 4 episodes already up on the channel. Make sure to go check that out. Thank you all so much for watching today. Please leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more. Comment your thoughts on all the Jimmy Butler trade speculation. I want to hear what you guys have to think, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.